Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the chief underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now, here's your host, Dr. W.F. Strong.
Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host this week, Dr. W.F. Strong, and I'm excited because we have a wonderful program for you today. We have with us Dr. Antonio Zavaleta, Tony Zavaleta, who has been a leading expert on the United States-Mexican border for over 40 years now. He is regularly consulted by academicians, by politicians, government agencies, and all kinds of media, including National Geographic, for instance, for his opinion on life along the border and the forces that are changing it. Dr. Zavaleta is a distinguished anthropologist, Ph.D. from UT Austin, and a longtime professor of anthropology at what is now the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. His greatest and most passionate interest has long been in Curanderismo. He has traveled far and wide, learning the healing arts and herbal and folk medicine remedies from curanderos and curanderas along the border. He has also traveled deep into Mexico, into the Sierra Madres and the famous deserts of Mexico, wherever he needed to go to learn about Curanderismo and the herbal markets that power these healing arts. He has published 4 books on the subject. One is going to come out shortly. And they are fascinating books. They have been well-reviewed, highly praised. One of them is Medicinal Plants of the Borderlands. I'm going to talk about that one a bit in our interview today. And the other one is Curandero Conversations, El Niño Fidencio, Shamanism, and Healing Traditions of the Borderlands. And then he has a new one coming out that we will talk to him about shortly. Tony, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Also want to mention that he is an old, dear friend of mine. We've known each other for 30 years now. And so I'm particularly delighted to have him to talk about Curanderismo. As I said, he is a leading expert, so let's all learn together. So, Tony, what I'm going to tell you is that I'm going to remind you of something that happened with you and me 30 years ago. And you may not remember the specific event, but you can comment on it.
Yeah,
I'm going to cue you. No.
Were we doing drugs?
No. No. 30 years ago, almost. And I was thinking of this morning, and I said, oh, my God, 30 years, really? You and I took a group of students down to Mexico.
Sure.
And we were down in Morelia, I believe, is where we were. And we had been driving, and there was a student who almost had 3 accidents in a given day. And you told me that night, you said, look, this guy has the susto, and I've got to take him to a curandero to take care of this problem.
I don't have any.
You don't remember that? No. And I remember.
I did that?
Yes, you took him. And you said, you told me it's important because he needs this cure.
Cleaned up. He needs to be cleaned up.
He said he's going to be a mess if we don't take care of this because he thinks that he's got the fear and this needs to be removed. And you may not remember the specific event, but for me it was unique because it was one of the first times I had traveled into Mexico and the first time I traveled with you. And you and I crossed paths many times in Mexico over the years, and you were always going off to talk to a curandero somewhere. So still are. So anyway, I have been fascinated. When did you first get interested in Curanderismo?
As a child.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in my forthcoming book, I describe the Bracero era, going back to about 1955 or 6, and my grandparents' cotton farm. Just right across the border about where Rio Bravo is today. Uh-huh. So between Matamoros and Reynosa, there's a little place called Rio Bravo. It's not so little anymore. And my grandparents in the 50s had a farm there, a cotton farm, and of all the 10,000 cousins that I had, very prolific family, Zavaletas everywhere, all one family. Uh-huh. I was the only one, and because of this, I was my grandparents' favorite grandchild. Mm-hmm. The only one that I just lived to go to the ranch. Uh-huh. Even about this, in April of every year when I was a kid, before I discovered girls and football, about this time of the year, I was oiling up my BB gun and collecting all the stuff on it, sharpening my knife and getting everything together, because as soon as I got out of school, my grandmother would pick me up and I'm off to the ranch. If you can believe that.
Yeah.
Well, I just lived it, and I still do.
But you're still that way, yes. You're always off to your ranch whenever you can.
I go off to my ranch today. So it was during the Bracero era, and the cotton fields went for miles, it seemed, to a little kid. Mm-hmm. And the Braceros would make their camps out in the field. They couldn't walk back to the house. There's no reason, because they were going to work the next day there. So they'd make their brasas. There's always that debate over whether bracero refers to people who work with their arms, or the brasas from the coals of the fire. Right. Two meanings.
Right.
And I was this little blonde-head, little towhead kid out there eating with them, living with them, sleeping on the ground. I was just in heaven. And they would talk, every evening after dinner, after they ate their dinner was a tortilla and some beans, they and some nopales, they would tell stories. That's the beauty, I think, of most, not just Mexican cultures, but all folk cultures, is the oral transmission of knowledge and information. And a lot of those people had actually been patients of the Niño Fidencio in Espinazo, Nuevo León in the 30s, because this is just less than 20 years later.
And he's a folk saint, right?
He's the number one. He's a folk saint and regarded as Mexico's top curandero ever, because he was mystical. It wasn't just a curandero. So I listened and I learned, and I heard about it, and I learned about him, and of course there wasn't anything I could read at that time. But as soon I have to believe that's where my interest, other than genetic, came from. When I got to UT Austin a few years later, as luck would have it, I was taking a cultural anthropology course, and we were given a list of 5 or 6 ethnographic films, and we had to go see one,
right,
and write 5 pages about it. And not knowing, I picked the Olsons film, the miraculous Niño Fidencio, and I went to that. And so that, once again, he pops back into my life. He doesn't let me go. He wants me to know that he's still there. So I've always, since childhood, I mean, if there's such a thing as a vocation, I've always studied, always been interested in, accompanied my grandparents, my grandmother, my father, to see curanderos. Brownsville's most famous curandero of all time, and Rosemary Martinez's grandfather was a fellow by the name of Don Perfecto, Don Perfecto Rodriguez. And I remember...
What a great name.
Oh, fabulous name. And he was Perfecto. And I remember my father was a candidate for a county commissioner back in the 60s, and I remember accompanying my father. We were going to go see Don Perfecto. All the politicians were expected to go there and receive his blessing, and he would adivinar, in Spanish, adivinar, divine the outcome of the elections and so forth for them.
And could he do that? Was he good?
Excuse me?
Was he good at that prophecy?
People swore by him. Yeah.
So he would say, if you run, you'll win.
Exactly. Or don't bother.
Or don't bother.
Win. Exactly. So that's the answer to that question, which is a good question, because that's the foundational question that I'm asked by everyone.
Yeah. Well, if you hadn't been a professor, if you had grown up in Mexico, for instance, would you have been a curandero yourself?
No, I don't think so, because there's only so much I'm going to tell you, okay? But I don't believe I have the don. In the world of Curanderismo, you have to. The belief is that you have a gift from God. In fact, the gift of healing is one of the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, and it's in the Bible. It's mentioned several places in the Bible. The Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost, conveys the gift of healing, the laying on of hands. And you have to have that. And in the Mexican American and Mexican traditions, we believe that gift is passed on generationally. So it's passed on from grandmothers to daughters to granddaughters, and there are men who are curanderos also, obviously. But I don't believe I have that. Yeah.
Well, when you read someone like, and this may be way out in left field, but when you read someone like Castaneda,
Yeah.
and he distinguishes between white magic and black magic, is there any of that involved with curanderismo?
Yeah, there is. You have to understand first of all that curanderismo has a flip side, and the flip side of curanderismo is brujeria, witchcraft. So you have these two opposing forces that exist, and I've been in fact, you and I used to travel with the university or the college down to Rancho del Cielo, and I used to, little did you know, I used to go visit a curandero down the road.
Well, you had this habit always of disappearing when we were in Mexico.
And
say, what happened to Zavaleta? I don't know.
Well,
he's went off somewhere.
A witch, that's right. Well, so I discovered this curandera down there, and I haven't seen her in a while, but I know that we're very close friends. And one time she told me, she said, "Don't come back until I tell you it's okay, because there's a war going on, a supernatural war between the curanderas and the brujas, trying to destroy one another. And if they learn of you, then they're gonna focus their witchcraft on me and hurt me." So I didn't go back and haven't been in I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years. But for example, here in Brownsville and along the U.S.-Mexico border in Edinburgh and Rio Grande City, Roma, there's some real serious witchcraft. I mean, witchcraft. People could go to YouTube and look up witchcraft in Brownsville, and there are a number of videos that I've put up there about real examples of witchcraft. So there's always this juxtaposition. There's always this battle going on. The witch, let's say, casts a spell. Not all spells or not all illnesses are cast by witches, but many are. The witch casts a spell on someone to make them sick or to kill them, and the curandera's job is to reverse it, to withdraw it, to take it off of the person has been witched. So there's plenty of work for everybody. Yeah, there's plenty of work.
Does the bruja, can she heal? Can she do good things, or do they just cast bad spells?
They say they can.
Yeah.
They say they can, and I have to believe they can, because it is. I wouldn't have brought it up, but since you did, there are people who do both. Who do, and of course the purists say, you can't do that. You're either one or the other. But my experience has been that there are people who are very effective at both. And they keep them separate. For example, maybe the healing is done in the house and the witchcraft's done out in the garage. You don't get them close to one another. And so I believe that there are people who both heal and practice witchcraft. Yes.
Now you have a book on the herbs that are often used in these healing plants, etc. Is that real important in curanderismo?
Yeah,
it's the central part of it.
It's absolutely important, and let me tell you how that came about. Because I've been, and you mentioned it, Zavaleta disappeared. Where is he? I've spent more than 50 years, traveling the border. When the border was a safe little, dusty little place, up and back on both sides, probably several times. From San Diego to Matamoros on the Mexican side, from Brownsville to San Diego, or from Tijuana, all back and forth, doing nothing more than searching for healers. And at one time or another, at least the older generations, I've interviewed them and talked to them. And one of the things I've always been wanted to do was was watching. I got to finish one sentence before I begin. My mind is racing so fast. One of the things I wanted to do was watch them in their practice.
Right.
Because the practice of curanderismo and witchcraft is extremely eclectic. And it's each individual practitioner develops their own. While they have a foundation, they develop their own methods. Now, and I would one of the things that I would do in watching them is take copious notes For example, so...
And did they mind that?
No, it didn't.
They don't care.
No, I'm a guy, for some reason I have a gift. My gift is people believe me.
Uh-huh.
That they can see. I was once interviewing a chief of the Comanche tribe, which was down in Stark County, purchasing peyote and for their ceremonies.
Right.
They buy hundreds of heads of peyote, and they take them back to Oklahoma, and they use them the entire year. Uh-huh. And I walk up there, knock on the door, and where they were staying, and I'd like to, can I watch you and see what you're doing? And this old man, he's an old man, old Indian. He looked at me, and he was quiet for a couple minutes, and he said, I looked into your heart. I looked into your heart, and you're okay.
Wow.
And so, yes, the answer is yes. So, and I've been told that many times. They don't fear me. I don't seem to scare anybody. And that's true, because I've never done anything to harm anybody who are practitioners. So
that's why once when we were down in San Miguel 25 years ago, and you told me you were going to see a curandero, and I said, can I go with you? And you said no. You weren't even nice about it. You just said no, because I have their trust, and if I bring you along, I understood.
I can't show up with
I understood. You said, I can't bring the big gringo. It's gonna screw up everything. But I understand. You have to build trust.
All right, thank you. Mm-hmm. So for 50 years, as I go from curandero to curandera to witch, I watch them practice, and they always give, as a part of their treatment, good or bad, they give a receta, a prescription. And they write it down, or they have somebody write it, because some of them are illiterate. Yeah. And they have a guardia and they write down, and I look at it and I say, okay, fine. And then I copy into my notebook the herbs that are being prescribed for an intestinal problem. Right? And so I had all those notes have been transcribed into this book. And let me tell you what's special about this book. This is just so people know, we're talking about medicinal plants of the Borderlands. That's the name of the book. But there's more to it. It is a bilingual resource guide. Mm-hmm. Okay? It is the only book on medicinal plants in publication that's totally bilingual. Mm. See, so often people will hear about a plant in Spanish, but they can't find out what it is in English. Or conversely, they'll hear about a plant, they'll know about a plant in English, but what is it called in Spanish? It's all right here in my book.
Can you think of an example of that where people look for one?
A very simple one, basil. Uh-huh. Okay, now most people know that. Well, no, that's not true. Most people don't know that. They know basil, but they don't know albahaca.
Okay.
Albahaca.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's true.
And then they don't know. But an albahaca is very often it's misspelled, and they'll spell it as albacar, but it's not albacar with an R. It's albahaca. It's not albacar. And so another thing, another idiosyncrasy of this is that between here and San Diego, there's like 4 or 5 regions of plants and culture.
Right.
And so what we call a particular plant, they call it something else over there. And then there are plants, like, for example, gobernadora, the governess or a plant,
right.
Okay, which is Creosote Bush.
Is that right?
Creosote Bush. Well, Creosote Bush doesn't grow here. You'd have to drive 200 miles west to find your first creosote bush.
It's got to be kind of desert-like for creosote.
It has to be kind of desert-like for creosote bush. That's exactly right.
It smells great after a rain, though.
Yes.
Creosote smells wonderful after it rains.
How do you know that?
I lived in Arizona.
Sitting in a peyote field out on the desert with creosote bushes and then the rain coming down, you're in heaven. You're in heaven. So that's why this book is so special, because it ought to be on the shelf of every doctor and pharmacist, because people are going to come in asking for some strange plant that they don't, and they're not going to know what it is, but they'll find it in here.
How popular are herberias along the border, let's say on the American side? Are they extremely popular?
There's one every block. Yeah. There's one in every community. People, one of the questions that I get from people is who don't know, and they ask the question innocently. They say, well, is curanderia and yerberia and all that, are these things disappearing in our technological world? And the answer is no. They're as strong as ever. There's more curanderismo today than there ever was. One of the reasons is because people, many Hispanics and Latinos are separated and are not able to access the healthcare industry. I mean, whether people want to admit it or not, they can't, especially in the world of psychiatry. And then the second reason is we have, tens of thousands of immigrants coming in from, which is a whole different area, coming in from Central America, and what they call a certain plant or a plant that exists in Nicaragua but not in the valley. Is imported for them.
Right.
So as long as there's a use, it's going to take me to another topic.
Okay.
As long as there is a need and a draw and a market,
right,
there's going to be a yerberia. And we have plenty. Let me tell you one other thing before for the last 35 years or maybe 35 years, about twice a year I go to Mexico City to the witches market, the Mercado Sonora.
Do they call it that?
Yes, the witches market, the Mercado Sonora. That being a witch or witchcraft has no stigma in Mexico.
Okay,
it's just a job. So you have this Mercado Sonora, which is this enormous expendido de hierbas, or the expendido is the wholesale market of plantas medicinales, medicinal plants. And I go there because I've been taking an inventory for all these years. I'm a smart guy. I've been taking an inventory, and when I see a new plant, like I'll go to Mexico City in May, and if I see something that's being sold that wasn't being sold a year ago, I'll ask him, what is this, and where does it come from, and what's it for? And I also find that the people who are the owners of the yerberias on the border will also go to Mexico City, or they'll go to Monterrey or San Luis. They may not go all the way to Mexico City. They don't have to. Right. You can go to Monterrey or Chihuahua, and buy what you need and come to the border. And there are many plants that are common to Central America that are being brought into the border. And no, I can't think of a single one right now.
But is there any herb that is illegal to bring across?
Yeah, there's some. Yes, there are some.
I mean, I know that peyote you can't, I would assume, bring across.
Yeah, but that's more than just an herb. But no, you can't. And every now and then I go to the bridge and I ask the USDA guys, but now we have a computer, so it's all online. You go online to the USDA and they have a list of plants that cannot be imported. Okay, and their reasons are pretty flimsy. And they don't really understand the science. Right. The USDA guys, they're good guys, but they're not chemists. Okay, and so there may be a plant that affects, like digitalis. Okay, there might be some foxglove. Right. Digitalis affects the heart. Right. Makes the heart go up or down or something. Or there may be a plant called flor de tila, and it's a sedative. And it's better than marijuana. I mean, it's a sedative. It will bring you way down, and they don't want that coming across the border. Even though people bring it across regardless.
Well, of course, a lot of pharmaceutical drugs, they find their basis in a plant.
Most of them.
Most of them, right?
Most of them.
And they just find that they can't make any money off the plant, so they reform it into a pill where they can make a lot of money. That's
right. That's exactly right. They identify the active ingredients, and then they mix up the active ingredient chemically without the plant. Yeah.
So what?
Let me give you an example.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I was going there. You go ahead.
I've got a good one. In the valley and all along in South Texas, we have ash trees. Right. In fact, it's the ash tree that's common to the border is called the Rio Grande ash. Rio Grande ash tree. In Spanish, the ash tree is a fresno, as in los fresnos. Okay. The entire ash tree has a chemical called, has a chemical. And the Native Americans knew that if you had a headache or muscular aches and pains, all you had to do is get a little piece of bark from the ash tree and boil it up in water and drink it, and you're drinking salicylic acid. Salicylic acid, which is the primary ingredient in aspirin. The primary ingredient in aspirin.
That's cool. I didn't know
It is
that.
cool. And that's why I wanted to get that one out.
So have you tried that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I've tried it. I didn't think it could hurt me, and it didn't. And it worked. So, you don't, if you can't find a pharmacy or you don't have an aspirin and you have an ash tree nearby, there you go.
There you go.
There's your cure, yeah.
So what other cures or treatments have you learned about through these
there's thousands.
various? I'm sure. What are the ones that stand out? That you say, here's one that people use a lot, and they like.
I got it. I got it. I once had a sister-in-law. She's now an ex-sister-in-law, and she married a New York guy.
Okay.
And so early in their marriage, they lived in New York. They're fine people, and she had a baby, and her baby, as so many babies do, had colic. Right?
That's colic.
I mean, they just have gas and colic, and
I've been there.
Oh, yes, sir, yes, sir. And a colicky baby is cries and can't sleep, and so you can't sleep and whatnot. And my sister-in-law took the baby to the
Pediatrician.
doctor, and he gave her all kinds of medicines for colic and so forth. But finally, I don't know that any of that worked, or not to her satisfaction. She called her mother here in Brownsville, and her mother said, Mijita, give your baby chamomile tea. Except she didn't call it chamomile. She called it
Manzanilla.
manzanilla, té de manzanilla, and which you can buy in the HEB.
Right.
And you get chamomile, manzanilla is the greatest cure for colic in the world. So there's another. I mean, examples like that just go on and on and on.
Well, let's go back to the curanderos themselves, because you spent a lot of time with, you didn't spend time with him because he died, Niño Fidencio died in 1938,
That's right.
And why did they call him?
I spent time with him in the spirit world.
Why did they call him the child?
They called Fidencio, his name was José Fidencio Sintora Constantino. And he was born in the state of Guanajuato. Just across the border, very close to, the border of Guanajuato and where San Miguel is, and in Guanajuato, and then a place called Yuriria, which is in the Lake District.
Okay.
Toward you probably haven't been over there. You might have toward the Michoacan border.
Yeah.
From the time he was, and I'm the possessor of the largest collection of photographs of the Niño Fidencio on the planet, because I've spent decades collecting his photographs. So I have this, and there'll be about 50 or 60 of them in my book. But anyway, Fidencio was, from the time he was just a little boy, and he did go to elementary school there in Yuriria. He was unusual.
Yeah.
Okay, he was unusual. In fact, he was so unusual that sometimes he scared the other little children, because not because he had anything evil in him, because there's absolutely nothing evil about Fidencio, but he could tell you where things were, and so the children began to, and I'm answering your question, the children began to play games with him, like hide things or whatever. He could always divine where they were, or what it was they were hiding. And he was also very often, even early in life, he was given to trance. I mean, now if you're a little kid and there's a kid in a trance, that's gonna freak you out.
Yeah, right. That's true. That's true.
So Fidencio, when he grew to where you and I began, three of us began to experience what are called secondary sexual characteristics. Secondary sexual characteristics. The voice began to deepen. We began to develop a beard and a mustache. The genitalia began to grow. Those are called in the world of human growth and development, those are called, you began to perspire and you'd smell.
Right.
And you needed, I remember when my father told me, tell your mother to buy you deodorant. I went, what are you talking about? Well, lo and behold, Fidencio never acquired a secondary sexual characteristic. Not even one. Even though he grew to be a full-size male, he had no secondary sexual characteristics. So he spoke. The people, the curanderos, very often feel like they're imitating his voice, but they're not. They're not. He had a very, very soft-spoken, high-pitched voice. He had no facial hair, no body hair. He had the male genitalia of a pre-adolescent boy. He had, he was a little boy. He had the genitalia of my son Michael. So they called him Nino, El Niño Fidencio. He wasn't just Fidencio, he was a Nino. Now, if you want to know why he had all that, one American scientist by the name of June Macklin, an anthropologist at Connecticut College, I believe she's retired, hypothesized that he had Klinefelter syndrome. And Klinefelter syndrome is when you have three sex chromosomes instead of two. So the three males sitting in the room, we all have two sex chromosomes. We have an X and a Y. Right. But the Klinefelter syndrome male has an XXY.
Right.
And that's what it does. It creates while that's a theory and has not been proven, it's plausible. Right. And so that's why they call him Nino.
And that probably gave him a unique mystical appeal.
Oh, there's no question about it. He had some. I mean, later on in life, when he was in his early 20s, he claimed to have mystical revelations. He claimed that he didn't say God or Jesus Christ, but he described a man that appeared to him and told him that he was going to be a healer, that he was going to have a life of suffering, that people would make fun of him, but yet he was going to have a tremendous power. Yeah. It's all in my book.
Okay. What were some of his rituals, you might say, or his unique approaches to things?
Fidencio.
Did he lay on hands? Did he?
Yeah, he did all that. But let's talk about some of the most unusual.
Okay.
Fidencio would conduct, and this is well documented, even by Hollywood, right? Because they sent a news crew out there. The Fox newsreel people back in the 1920s sent a crew out there to witness this. Anyway, he could perform surgeries using broken bottle glass.
Oh, my.
Yeah. Yeah. So he would tell his helpers, I should have brought some pictures. He would tell his helpers, break a bottle and bring me the sharpest piece.
Shard.
The sharpest shard is exactly right. And they would do it, and he'd say, no, that's not enough. Bring me another one. And when he got the one that he wanted, and he always performed surgery on the ground, on the dirt. Okay, he'd say, let's say you had a tumor, one of his cases, a tumor on the knee, right? Lie down here on the dirt, and he would extract that tumor with a piece of glass. Okay, people claim there was never any pain. Nobody felt any pain. They did not bleed, and there was no infection. That's miraculous.
Yes.
I'm sure a man of your education knows the word taumaturge. He was a taumaturge, a miracle, a Latin word which means miracle worker. Yeah. Taumaturgo in Spanish. He was a taumaturge, and he just had. I mean, how the hell can that happen? But you know what? Arrigo of the Rusty Knife in Brazil did the same thing. John of God in Brazil, who's a contemporary, does the same thing. So and there have been others in the Philippines and in Africa. In every generation, there are a few really outstanding people who seem to have the ability to do that, so he could perform surgeries. He also could bilocate. So he could be standing right here, sitting right here with us in the room, and he could also appear in somewhere else.
My,
And, yeah,
that's quite a talent.
That's quite a challenge.
Yeah.
That's quite mystical.
Yes.
And perform a healing there, and come back, and he's still sitting right there in the room with us. Never left.
Whoa.
Yeah,
That's
and that's
spooky.
documented. He could change his appearance. He could change his appearance, the way he weigh. I mean, he couldn't change himself into a lizard
Right.
or a frog,
Right.
but he could sure change his skin color. He could change his facial appearance, his eye color. He could do all that.
My.
Yeah.
And would you say that he was the most famous curandero in his time in, let's say, the Latin American world?
Well, from Mexico, not in Latin America.
In Mexico.
In Mexico, and not for his time, this time.
This time.
He's the most famous curandero going forward.
Going forward.
Yeah, from the 1920s. The peak of his popularity was when Mexican President Calles went to see him, and he allegedly cured Calles of some sort of skin ailment he had, and that was in 1928. And then, that was, his popularity continued into the early 1930s, but then, like anything, it began to wear off.
Yeah.
And then by the end of his life, people were still coming to see. He died in 1938, as you pointed out. By the end of his life, things had calmed down considerably. People were still coming to see him, but what happened was, and I study this in my book, he was his followers and following were transformed from just a day in, day out thing to a cult, to a religious, a benevolent healing, what I call a benevolent healing cult, with Fidencio as the millenarian messianic leader.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do they call his church?
His church is called the Christian Church of Fidencio.
Fidencio.
Yeah.
But it's not Catholic. It's separate.
It's not. No, it's separate. Even though his followers claim to be Catholic, but his church is not Catholic.
So then he's not being considered for sainthood, I take it.
No.
But he did start out with a Catholic priest, right? I mean, when he was young?
Yes, that's true. He was an altar boy.
Yes.
Yeah, he was an altar boy. He was always. See, what happened was, yes, he was always. Gosh, I'm at a loss for a word. Can you imagine? He was always drawn
Yes.
toward the Catholic Church and so forth. But during the years of Revolution, and especially in the years after the Revolution, in what is called the Cristero Revolt, right? The Cristero Revolt. President Calles was determined, who was, for all practical purposes, a communist. He was determined to drive the Catholic Church out of Mexico. He and many Catholic, an awful lot of Catholic property and wealth was expropriated by the government. Catholic priests and bishops and clergy were killed. A firing squad there, so they were mowed down.
I've always just found that so astonishing that would happen in
I
Mexico.
know, exactly.
I just can't believe
but
that.
it did.
Uh-huh.
It did. And so during the time of the Cristero Revolt, Fidencio, and there were no priests around, and people wanted the sacraments,
Right.
the 7 sacraments, he began performing the sacraments.
Providing, no?
And that's when he had a break with the Catholic Church. In other words, they told him, stop that, don't do that. You're not a priest and you can't give sacraments. And he said he would. He said he would stop. But the people clamored for Mass, communion, marriage, baptism.
Yeah, life must go on.
Life must go on.
There's nobody else there
So
to do it.
he performed those things, and the Catholic Church in the diocese of Monterey and Saltillo said, he's a devil. It's not holy. And so that's why any chance, if there was ever a chance, and I don't know, there are many people that had the characteristics of Fidencio in Europe in medieval times that are saints, became saints. And so he very well could have, but because of politics, he did not.
If you go to his birthplace today,
Yeah, I've been there.
I assume there's a shrine or some. No, there's nothing.
No, because his birthplace is so difficult to find and locate. And I took a curandero with me to search for it, a trance medium, and we found it. And when we got there, she fell into a trance and channeled the Niño Fidencio and began crying and sobbing. And he spoke through her, and he thanked us. And he said, "Thank you so much for bringing me back to my birthplace. I haven't been here in so many years." Yeah, exactly. So no, there's no marker. There's nothing there. There's nothing, absolutely nothing.
But is there something somewhere that there's no shrine for him anywhere?
Yeah, in Espinazo, Nuevo
Oh,
León,
okay.
his tomb.
His tomb is
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. It's a major pilgrimage site.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. It must be some place that
Yeah,
they,
in Espinazo,
they have.
which is
so you can leave your picture there. And,
you can do that,
And
I have. It's about 90 kilometers northwest of Monterrey on the road to Monclova.
well, as you know, I grew up in Falfurrias, and Don Pedro de los Olmos is there.
That's right.
And his.
I have a great story about that.
Well,
But
good.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to mention that his tomb is a bigger deal today by far than it was when I was growing up there.
Yeah.
It's because his fame and notoriety is greater than ever.
And you know why, in my opinion?
Why?
Well, first of all, there are more people, Mexican Americans, and they're empowered and they have cars and they can drive. But you know, Eliseo Torres, my compadre, who was at Kingsville at A&I, he wrote 3 or 4 books. And there are other people, not just Eliseo, but Hudson and others that wrote books about Pedro Jaramillo. And so it's just sort of like the value, I hope, my books have on the Niño Fidencio. I mean, they're out there, and people that are interested are going to find them. You can find them on Amazon.com, and then people are going to begin. Are going to. I've seen just in my time, not to take you away from Jaramillo, but just in my 30 years, the number of people that are participating in the cult of Fidencio has grown tremendously. Well, let me tell you a story.
Okay.
My great-grandparents, Bartolo, Zavaleta, and Eufemia Chapa Saenz, lived on a ranch outside of Roma, Texas. Okay? And Eufemia seemed to have difficulty conceiving, right?
Right.
So somebody suggested to Bartolo, and by the way, Bartolo Zavaleta was spelled with a B. It was spelled the Spanish way and not the,
Zavaleta,
the way it's supposed to be. And they suggested to him, he says, why don't you take your wife to see Pedro Jaramillo up in Falfurrias? He can probably help you. And so Bartolo, he decided that this is family lore. He said, that's a good idea. So he got his wife, Eufemia, up in the wagon. It was a 2-day trip from Roma.
Yeah, it's a long way.
And you had to stop overnight at a spring. And there was always Indian predation, so he had to take 4 or 5 vaqueros with him. Vaquero, as in UT vaqueros. And they went, and they spent the night. And the next day, they're pulling into Don Pedrito's shrine there along Los Olmos Creek. And this is quintessential Pedrito Jaramillo. He sends his helper out. He says, there's a wagon pulling up. Go out there and tell them, don't even bother getting out of the wagon. Just turn around. She's already pregnant.
That is a great story.
Now, wait a minute.
Okay.
It gets better.
It gets better, okay.
So, as the story lore goes, the family lore goes, Bartolo, who was the first elected constable in Starr County, a Hispanic elected constable. He's a big guy, he's my size. He said, okay, está bien. Turned the wagon around, they went home. And indeed, she was pregnant. And they named their baby Pedro. And that's my grandfather. And that's how the name, and Pedro, Peter, is my brother's name, Peter. It's a common name in the family because they named my grandfather after Pedro Jaramillo.
How interesting.
Isn't that something?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, we crossed paths a long time ago because I used to go, when I lived there as a kid, I would go on hikes, we just go out and camp out and stuff. And I would go camp on Los Olmos Creek, but we would always stop by and see his little tomb.
To this day, when I'm not in a big hurry, when I'm going deer hunting or something, I stop there. I stop by there.
But I remember as a kid, when I was 13, 14 years old, I was shocked at looking at the pictures people left among the candles and where they were from. California and Florida. And I said, my God, people come from all over.
They do.
And it just surprised me.
That's right. It's because as the belief goes, you make a promise. So that what they did was you petition. They petition Pedro Jaramillo to provide them, to intercede with God, to provide them with a miracle of some sort.
Of some sort, huh?
And when they promise, they say, I'm asking you to intercede with God, the Father, to provide us, our family, with this miracle. And we promise in return, la promesa, we promise in return to make the pilgrimage to see to his site.
Okay.
And leave the maleta, leave the crutches, leave the picture, leave the trenza, whatever it is. And you have your entire life. There's no time limit. You don't have to do that within a year, 5 years, 10 years. So but you have to do it. And so that during the course of their life, they make the pilgrimage, and that's a pilgrimage from Florida or California or wherever to the shrine of Pedrito Jaramillo to say thank you.
Wow.
That's cool.
I'm happy to know that. I did not know.
Going here now?
Oh, a long time. Well, that's good. That's good. We have enough to work with. One thing I did. How can people reach you?
Me?
Yes, you. If people want to get in touch with you,
well, they can email me. That's Tony Zavaleta, all together without a dot, with one T at AOL.com.
At AOL, okay.
Or they can Facebook me. Okay. That's Tony Zavaleta, Reed, because my son Tony is also Tony Zavaleta. Tony Zavaleta Reed, my mother's maiden name.
At Facebook.com.
At Facebook.com.
And then your books are on Amazon. So
my books are on Google, they're on Amazon, they're every major bookseller, and they come, and they're not expensive, by the way.
No, they're not.
No, they're not expensive, and they come in days.
And the cures that you can get out of them, or the treatments, are worth the price alone.
I want you to know, my books will live on after I'm gone for generations. They are so valuable. People don't realize it's going to be future generations that discover the value of these books. Now,
your next book coming out is what?
Is
on the Niño Fidencio.
It's called El Niño Fidencio, Curanderismo in the U.S.-Mexico borderland.
We've been talking with Dr. Antonio Zavaleta about his books on Curanderismo and his travels and his journeys and his insights about the healing arts of Curanderismo. If you want to read more about him, you just go on to Amazon, and all of his books are there. He has a book that will come out shortly, and we will probably interview him again when that is published. And I'd like to remind you once again that if you would like to hear this particular interview with Dr. Zavaleta again, you can go to our Facebook page and listen to it there as a podcast, or you can go to our YouTube channel and hear it there as well. If you have any comments or questions, you can write to me, drwfstrong@gmail.com. Now, since we have just a few moments left, I thought I would take this opportunity to talk about a couple of books that I've come across where I was not able to set up interviews with the authors, but I think that these books are worth your time. The first one is called The End of Average, written by Todd Rose, who is a professor at Harvard University. It is called The End of Average, How We Succeed in a World That Values Sameness. He makes the point that we are often caught up a lot into averages and means and modes and those sort of statistical middles that we have come to idolize. And he tells the story in the beginning of the book about the very first story he tells, actually, is what pulled me in. He said that back in the 40s, when military jet aircraft were just getting a foothold. They were, the new technology. There was a lot of problems with accidents. A lot of the pilots were dying from fast-paced accidents, naturally. And one day they had as many as 36 accidents in one day. And this, of course, got the Air Force worried, and they said, what in the world is going on here? Is this a problem with the jet aircraft being too fast for humans to control them? Is this a mechanical error, or is this a pilot error? What is going on? And so they investigated this, and they found that the cockpits were designed for the average pilot, meaning that most pilots were between 5'7" and 6 feet tall. And so the cockpits were designed for the middle of that, for the average pilot, physically and otherwise. And what they found was that there was no such thing as an average pilot. Nobody actually was average. You had everybody quite a ways off of that middle. There was a hypothetical middle. And consequently, they had seats that didn't move. They had instrument panels that were not flexible and also did not adjust to the pilot. And so the optics were changed for the worse for many people. And the seating arrangement and reach and everything was for an average person. But as he pointed out, most people were not average, and this was contributing to the enormous number of accidents. And so the Air Force said to Boeing and others, if you want to build airplanes for us, you've got to build flexible or movable, rather, instrument panels. You've got to have seats that can adjust for the individual in a variety of ways so that the pilots have better reach and better optics. And the airplane or aeronautical industry contractors said, we can't do that. That'll be prohibitively expensive. But the Air Force stuck to its guns and said, this is what we must have if you want to get the contract. So amazingly, within a year, a lot of these large companies solved the problem, and accidents dropped. And this was the precursor, of course, to automobiles having adjustable seats and all kinds of individualized adjustments that exist in your car right now. The steering wheel moves, the seat moves, the instrument panel adjusts often in some vehicles, lighting intensity, etc. So many adjustments are there for you because of what happened back in the 40s. So that's just the opening salvo in the book, and it's called The End of Average, and it talks about the disadvantages of focusing on average everywhere to the detriment of trying to find ways to truly excel and create extraordinary opportunities for the individual. Okay, so that book is out now, and you can get it, of course, at the usual places of Amazon. Now, the next one I wanted to talk about is called, it's got a great title, Poems That Make a Grown Men Cry. Excuse me, let me say that again. Poems That Make Grown Men Cry. 100 Men on Words That Move Them, edited by Anthony and Ben Holden. Now, this particular book I found fascinating because what they did is they went out and they got a lot of famous men, and they said to them, tell us the one poem that you've come across in your life that made you cry or had a great deal of meaning to you. And these are a great number of people that you've heard of, people like Patrick Stewart and people like Stephen Fry and Joe Klein, etc., Robert Bly. These are, Robert Bly, you remember, wrote the book called Iron John about how to be a manly man in the modern world. In any case, the collection of poems is just great, even if you aren't one who particularly likes poetry. This is one that has a lot of poems that are quite readable, and you don't have to dig deep to understand them. The meaning's right there on the surface. It reads like really good prose, I would say, in many cases. So the idea about this is that this is a fascinating anthology, 100 men distinguished in literature and film and science and architecture, theater, human rights. They are ones who confess to being moved to tears by poems that continue to haunt them after all these years. And their selections include classics by visionaries such as Walt Whitman or W.H. Auden, or by Philip Larkin, as well as modern works by such masters as Billy Collins and Haney and Derek Walcott, and works from poets who span the globe. Their themes range from love in its many, many guises, through mortality, loss, to the beauty and variety of nature, from J.J. Abrams to John le Carre to Salman Rushdie to Jonathan Franzen. These are some of the people who are selecting great poems and poems that move them. So I found it an incredibly wonderful read, and I will admit to the fact that not all the poems made me cry. I don't think any of them really made me cry. Maybe I'm just not a manly man. But I did certainly have those that made me a little misty. I will confess to that. So I just thought it was a wonderful experiment in literature, and I highly recommend it to you. Poems that make grown men cry. You will enjoy it. Pick it up. That's all our time for today. I'm W.F. Strong, signing off for Good Books Radio. Here's hoping that all your books are good reads.